Imagine a single project, just one undertaking, so massive. It didn't just reshape America's landscape. It fundamentally altered our economy, our society, even where and how millions of us live our daily lives. I mean, so much of what you do today, how you get to work, what you buy, where you go on vacation, it's all still tied to this one colossal thing.
So today we're doing a deep dive into the Dwight D. Eisenhower National System of Interstate and Defense Highways, or as pretty much everyone calls it, the Interstate Highway System.
Exactly. And our mission here is to really unpack that ambitious history. We'll get into some surprising facts about, how it was built, how it was designed, and crucially, look at its profound impacts and sometimes, pretty contradictory impacts on American life, the economy, culture. We'll also look at how it sort of contrasts with and intersects with these legendary older routes like Route 66. That's a whole different story, but just powerful.
Okay, so to really get a grip on how huge this vision was, let's go back early 20th century. What was driving even before the interstates? Can you paint a picture? Oh, it was rough. I mean, picture this. Mostly dirt roads, mud, cars rarely getting past, say, 25 miles per hour, and nationally, only about 12% of roads were paved. It was really just a patchwork, often pretty treacherous.
This is 12%. Wow.
Yeah. And early efforts to fund roads, well, they were pretty piecemeal. You had things like the Federal Aid Road Act of 1916 promising states matching funds, but that mostly stalled because of World War I. The focus and the money went there. But even then, the idea of a national grid was starting to percolate. Like in late 1918, this civil engineer, E.J. Marin, proposed a 50,000-mile system. 5 routes east-west, 10 north-south, hitting every state. It's a bold idea for the time.
And for Dwight Eisenhower, this wasn't just some abstract concept, right? There's a personal story there, a really key experience he had early on.
Absolutely. You got to go back to 1919. He was just a 28-year-old brevet lieutenant colonel then. He joined this U.S. Army Motor Transport Corps convoy. The whole point was to see how difficult it was for military vehicles to cross the country. And Ike, well, he later described the roads out west as just a succession of dust, ruts, pits, and holes.
Sounds miserable.
It took them 62 days, 62, to go 3,200 miles on the Lincoln Highway, constant breakdowns. That whole ordeal, it really stuck with him.
62 days. You could probably walk it faster.
Yeah.
So how did that frustration, that early experience, connect to his later push for the highways?
Well, it's fascinating. That memory lingered. Then, during World War II, when he was supreme commander in Europe, he saw Germany's Autobahn system up close. He saw how crucial this modern connected highway network was for national defense moving troops, supplies, quickly and efficiently. So that insight, combined with his own awful cross-country trip years before, directly fueled his vision for a similar system in the U.S. when he became president.
It all sort of clicked together for him.
Exactly. And it wasn't just Eisenhower either. People had been floating ideas for a national system for decades before he really pushed it through.
Right, there were precursors.
Oh, yeah. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1921 aimed for a national grid. Then in 22, General Pershing submitted his Pershing Map, 20,000 miles of highways deemed essential for defense. Even FDR, back in 38, apparently sketched out 8 superhighway corridors on a map himself. And then you had these key reports, toll roads and free roads, interregional highways. They laid the groundwork, really described what became the interstate system. The idea was definitely building momentum.
So that momentum, plus Eisenhower's personal conviction, it all culminates in the big one. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956.
That's the one. Eisenhower appoints General Lucius Clay to head up a committee. And Clay was really key in framing why they needed it. It wasn't just one reason. It was safety roads were getting crowded. It was accommodating all the new cars hitting the road. It was defense, absolutely. And critically, it was seen as this engine for economic growth, way beyond just a public works job.
And Clay's proposal, the scale was just unbelievable, wasn't it?
Immense. He proposed a 10-year, $100 billion program. Which, just to put that in perspective, that's like $1.17 trillion in 2024 money.
$1 trillion?
Yeah. To build 40,000 miles of divided highways, the goal was linking basically every American city, over 50,000 people. It was a commitment unlike anything before.
And the funding. I remember reading Eisenhower initially liked the idea of toll roads, but that's not what happened.
That's right. Ike did favor tolls at first. But Clay, again, was crucial. He convinced him tolls just wouldn't work everywhere. Maybe in populated coastal areas, but not across the whole country. So that led to the big decision. Finance it mainly through the Highway Trust Fund, funded mostly by a federal gas tax.
And the federal government picked up most of the tab, right?
An amazing 90%. The feds paid 90%, states paid 10%. That 90-10 split was really designed to get states on board quickly.
Makes sense. So they had the money sorted. Then they needed the actual map. Tell us about the Yellow Book.
Right, the blueprint. That came out in 1955. Officially, it was called General Location of National System of Interstate Highways, but everyone called it the Yellow Book because of the cover. It mapped out the proposed routes, and importantly, it set the core standards. Interstates had to be freeways, minimum 4 lanes, and crucially, no at-grade crossings, no intersections at the same level. That was revolutionary for roads back then.
Okay, so the act is signed in 56. The money's there, the plan's there, the race is on to start building. And like any big project, there's a bit of a fight over who was actually first, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic historical tussle. Missouri claims the first 3 contracts under the new act were signed there on August 2nd, 1956. First one was for upgrading part of what's now I-44, but then Kansas jumps in and says, hold on, we were the first to actually start paving after the act passed. That was September 26, 1956, on their section of I-70. And then you've got the Pennsylvania Turnpike, opened way back in 1940. It wasn't built under the 56 Act, obviously, but it already had a lot of the features, limited access, multiple lanes. So it gets nicknamed the grandfather of the interstate system.
The grandfather. I like that. It shows the idea was already there.
Exactly. It was brewing.
So putting aside the who was first debate, what were some other big moments, memorable milestones, as this network started spreading?
Well, Nebraska became the first state to finish all its mainline interstates. That was when the last piece of I-80 was dedicated there in 1974. And a really big one, symbolically, was finishing the first continuous freeway from Canada down to Mexico. That was I-5, completed near Stockton, California in 1979, showed that continental vision.
Connecting the whole continent. And speaking of big milestones, there's that amazing story about I-80 finishing coast to coast, right? The connection to the railroad.
Oh, yeah. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The final piece of I-80, stretching all the way from California to New Jersey, was dedicated in Utah in 1986. And the incredible thing, that spot was only about 50 miles away from Promontory Summit, where they drove the Golden Spike for the first transcontinental railroad almost 120 years earlier.
Wow. Like a new golden spike moment for the highway age.
Exactly. It really felt like that, a new era of American connection.
Such a cool historical echo. But these huge projects, they never go perfectly smoothly. What kind of challenges, maybe local resistance, did the system run into? These freeway revolts?
Oh, definitely. It wasn't smooth everywhere. These freeway revolts, as they were often called, caused major delays, forced big reroutes like the Papago Freeway Tunnel under downtown Phoenix for I-10. That only happened after a huge fight against the original plan for an elevated highway that would have just sliced through the city. And in Wallace, Idaho, the I-90 viaduct that bypasses the town now, that was built because residents cleverly got most of their downtown declared a historic district. That blocked the original plan to run the highway right through town, demolishing loads of buildings.
Good for them. Shows local power.
It really does. Communities could push back against these massive federal plans.
So despite those fights, the original system did get officially declared complete eventually. When was that, and what was the final piece?
October 14th, 1992. That's the official date. The final piece was I-70 through Glenwood Canyon in Colorado. And that section is just an engineering marvel. It's only 12 miles long, but it has 40 bridges, numerous tunnels. It's considered one of the most expensive rural highways ever built per mile. Just incredible terrain they had to deal with.
40 bridges and 12 miles. And I bet a project this enormous didn't exactly stick to the original budget, did it?
Oh, not even close. The initial estimate, $25 billion over 12 years. The final cost, $114 million, which is something like $618 billion in 2023 dollars, and it took 35 years.
Wow. So more than 4 times the cost and almost triple the time.
Yeah, a slight overrun, you might say. Really shows the complexity.
Okay, so 1992, it's declared complete. But the story doesn't quite end there, does it?
Yeah.
There was still some gaps, unfinished bits.
That's a really important point. Yeah, complete was maybe a bit optimistic. Even after 92, 2 of the original big ones, I-95 and I-70, were still discontinuous. Local opposition had blocked key connections.
Right, I remember hearing about the I-95 gap in New Jersey.
Exactly. That was finally fixed, closed up in 2018 with a new interchange. But I-70, well, it still has that famous gap in Breezewood, Pennsylvania.
Ah, Breezewood, where you have to get off the interstate and drive through town to get back on.
That's the one. You have to use a short stretch of US 30. Originally, it was due to old funding rules about toll roads. Those rules relaxed, but now there's strong local resistance to building a bypass. Businesses there rely on that traffic.
So local economics keeping that gap open. Fascinating.
It really is a little pocket where national continuity lost out to local interests.
So completion was a milestone, but it sounds like the system is still very much alive, still evolving. Are they still adding new routes?
Oh, absolutely. It keeps expanding. You've got I-49, which started in Louisiana back in the 80s. Now it's this designated corridor aiming to go all the way north to Kansas City. And there are these really ambitious long-term plans, like I-69, supposed to stretch from Mexico up to Canada eventually, and I-11, aiming to connect Phoenix and Vegas, fill that gap, become part of this bigger Canamex trade corridor idea.
So still growing.
Hmm.
But thinking back to those freeway revolts,
Yeah.
beyond just delaying things, were there planned interstates that just got canceled altogether because communities pushed back so hard?
Yes, definitely. Not every line on the map got built. We mentioned Phoenix, but I-40 in Memphis, Tennessee got significantly rerouted because of citizen action. I-66 inside Washington, D.C. was abandoned in '77 after huge protests. And in Baltimore, there's the infamous Highway to Nowhere. That was part of I-70 and its spur I-170. The plan got canceled because it was going to cut through a major park. So you have this partially built stub of I-170 just sitting there. A real monument to canceled plans.
A highway to nowhere. Wow. And even more dramatic, are we actually seeing plans now to remove points of the interstate system? Tear them down?
We are, yeah. The thinking is definitely shifting in some cities. The prime example is I-81 in Syracuse, New York. It's this elevated viaduct built in the 60s, and it just sliced right through the city's historic black neighborhood, the 15th Ward, cutting it off from downtown. Now the plan is to actually tear it down, replace it with a more pedestrian-friendly boulevard, reroute the through traffic onto another interstate. It's a huge deal, trying to heal those old wounds and reconnect the city.
Tearing down an interstate. It really shows how perspectives have changed.
It really does. Prioritizing community over just moving cars as fast as possible. Now, when you're driving on these interstates, you notice they all feel kind of similar, right? That's because they're built to really strict standards. They have to have controlled access, so generally no traffic lights, no cross streets, except maybe toll booths or ramp meters. You need physical barriers or wide median strips between opposing traffic, wide breakdown lanes, or shoulders. Plus, all the signs, the federal signs, have to follow national standards. Gives you that uniform look and feel everywhere.
And part of that uniformity is speed limits, though those do vary quite a bit state by state, don't they? And let's clear this up. That old urban legend that 1 in every 5 miles had to be straight for airplanes. Total myth, right?
Totally a myth, yeah. Speed limits definitely vary, generally lower in the Northeast, higher out west. You might see 40 mile per hour in downtown Cumberland, Maryland on I-68 because it's tight and curvy. But then parts of I-10 or I-20 in rural Texas or I-80 out in Nevada, you can legally do 80 mile per hour. Big difference.
80.
And yes, that airplane thing, complete legend. Military readiness was a factor in the planning, sure, facilitating troop movements if needed. But the main drivers were civilian traffic, commerce, safety, no secret plan for emergency runways. Probably for the best, can you imagine?
Yeah, probably wise. Now, the numbering system is actually pretty ingenious once you understand it. How does that work?
And it really is clever, developed back in '57.
Yeah.
Okay, so odd numbers like I-5 or I-95 run north-south. And the numbers get bigger as you go from west to east. So I-5 is on the west coast, I-95 is on the east coast. Even numbers like I-10 or I-90 run east-west. And those numbers get bigger as you go from south to north. I-10 is way down south, I-90 is up near the Canadian border.
Okay, odd north-south, even east-west.
Right. And routes whose numbers end in 5 or 0, like I-95, I-80, I-75, those are usually the major cross-country arteries, designed for long-haul traffic. It makes navigation pretty intuitive once you get the hang of it.
Yeah, and then you have the 3-digit interstates, the loops and spurs. What do those numbers tell you?
Yeah, those auxiliaries, they mostly serve cities.
Yeah.
The first digit is the key. If it's an odd number, like I-395, it's a spur. It connects to its parent interstate at only one end, usually heading into a city center. If the first digit is even, like I-495 or I-287, it's usually a loop or a beltway. It connects back to its parent interstate at both ends, or sometimes forms a complete circle around a city. Again, really logical once you know the code.
A little secret code on the road signs.
Kind of. And here's a surprise. The system even includes highways in Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico.
Really? Even though they're not connected by land?
Yep. They still pay the federal fuel taxes that fund the system, so they get designated routes. In Hawaii, they start with an H, like H1. And speaking of quirks, check out I-19 down in Arizona near the Mexican border. It actually uses kilometer-based exit numbers.
Kilometers in the U.S.
Yeah. It's a leftover from the 70s when the U.S. briefly flirted with going metric. They put up the signs on I-19 and just never took them down. It's a weird little anomaly.
That's wild. And what about mile markers and exit numbers generally? Is there a standard there too?
Mostly. Mile markers almost always start at 0 at the southern or western state line or wherever the route begins within the state, and increase going north or east. And most interstates now use distance-based exit numbering. So exit 150 is right around mile marker 150. Makes it easy to figure out distances.
But not everywhere uses that.
Not everywhere. Some northeastern states, like New York, Connecticut, still use the older sequential system, exit 1, exit 2, exit 3, regardless of the mileage. Which can lead to funny things, like on I-87 in New York, there are actually multiple exit 4s in different places along the highway. Can definitely cause a double take if you're not used to it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I can see that. And finally, those green shields, the business routes.
Right, the business loops or spurs. They have that distinctive green shield instead of the usual red, white, and blue. They're designed to take you off the main interstate bypass and guide you through a town's central business district. They don't have to meet those super strict freeway standards, so they can run along regular city streets, helping keep downtowns connected to the traffic flow.
Okay, so we have this massive system. Who actually owns all this concrete and asphalt? And who keeps it all maintained? It must be a huge job.
It is a huge job, and it's important to remember, even though the federal government paid for most of the construction, the interstates are actually owned by the state they're in. So maintenance usually falls to the state departments of transportation, the state DOTs, though sometimes really short little segments might be handled by local cities or counties, but mostly it's the state's responsibility.
Gotcha. And the money to maintain them and maybe build new parts, that mostly comes from us drivers, right? Through user fees.
That's the core idea, yeah. It's primarily funded by user fees, mainly fuel taxes, gasoline, and diesel that flow into that highway trust fund we mentioned. The federal gas tax, for instance, started way back in 1932 at just 1 cent a gallon. It's crept up over the years, but it's actually been stuck at 18.4 cents per gallon since 1993.
Since 93. Wow, it hasn't kept up with inflation then.
Not at all. That's a whole other debate about infrastructure funding. But yeah, technically, every time you fill up, a chunk of that tax goes into the trust fund for highways and transit. It's meant to be a user-funded system.
Now, tolls? That's always a hot topic. How do they fit? I thought interstates were supposed to be free.
It's definitely controversial. Okay, so some existing toll roads, like the Pennsylvania Turnpike or the New York Thruway, were sort of grandfathered in when the system was created because they were already there and provided logical connections. But yeah, federal law originally banned tolls on new interstates built with that 90% federal money. That's changed a bit over time, though. Now, states can sometimes use tolls for new lanes or even some new interstate segments, often under rules for innovative financing. Think hot lanes, high occupancy toll lanes, where you can pay to use a less congested lane. It's an evolving picture as states look for more funding.
Okay, makes sense. And visually, the most iconic thing is that red, white, and blue interstate shield. Instantly recognizable.
Oh, yeah.
What's the story behind that design?
That shield is actually a registered trademark of AH2, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. The design itself was the winning entry in a contest back in 1957, submitted by Richard Oliver, who worked for the Texas Highway Department. It's evolved slightly over the years, the exact shade of blue, the size, but that basic shield shape and the colors have remained constant. It's just incredibly effective graphic design, instantly communicating interstate across the entire country.
It really is iconic. Okay, let's shift gears to the impact. Economically, this system was transformative, right?
Profoundly. It caused a sharp decline in passenger rail travel, that's for sure. Freight rail took a hit, too, initially. But the trucking industry just exploded. Shipping costs plummeted. Travel times dropped dramatically. It made everything cheaper to move. The Federal Highway Administration actually estimated the system returned something like $6 in economic benefit for every $1 spent building it.
$6 back for every $1. That's huge.
It is. And they figured about a quarter of the whole nation's productivity increase between 1950 and 1989 could be chalked up to investing in the highway system. It was a massive engine for the economy.
Those numbers are incredible.
Ah.
But that kind of massive change, it never happens in a vacuum. What were the big societal shifts that came along with the interstates?
Huge shifts. It directly fueled the rise of suburbanization. Suddenly, people could live much farther from city centers and still commute relatively easily. That led to the boom in larger, sprawling, car-dependent housing developments. It fundamentally changed where and how Americans lived.
Right, the birth of the modern suburb.
Pretty much. It also sparked a massive boom in tourism. Motels, gas stations, roadside restaurants popped up everywhere along the exits. It made long-distance car travel accessible to millions more people, and it was fundamental to the growth of cities, especially in the Sun Belt. Places like Phoenix, Atlanta, Houston, their growth patterns were heavily shaped by the interstate network, making them very car-centric cities.
So for daily life, it meant driving became, well, more predictable. Less
Uh,
of an adventure, maybe.
yeah, you could say that. Driving became much more standardized, more efficient. You knew what to expect on an interstate pretty much anywhere in the country. Which, yes, maybe made it less of an adventure than driving the old two-lane highways. But the flip side was reliability. And for businesses, it meant goods could be shipped way longer distances, much faster. That opened up huge new markets, allowed factories to move away from traditional industrial centers, often to the south where costs were lower. I mean, think about it. Almost everything you buy today probably spent some time on an interstate trek.
That's a good point. But connecting all this,
Yeah,
the highways weren't universally celebrated, were they?
yeah.
There were major downsides, major criticisms.
Absolutely. Big downsides. One of the biggest criticisms is how they often sliced right through the hearts of existing cities, dividing neighborhoods, creating physical and social barriers. The construction displaced over 1 million people nationwide, according to estimates. Homes, businesses, just
A
gone.
million people.
Yeah. And many rural towns that got bypassed by the new interstates, they withered, became near ghost towns, losing their motels, diners, gas stations. There are songs written about that feeling, like Route 22. It echoed the way railroads bypassed towns a century earlier.
And there's an even darker side to that displacement, isn't there? The way these highways disproportionately affected minority communities.
Yes, that's a really crucial and often painful part of the story. When planners were deciding where to route the highways, especially through cities, it was often cheaper and politically easier to acquire land through eminent domain in lower-income, predominantly minority neighborhoods. So these massive freeways often ended up destroying the fabric of these communities, cutting them off from jobs, services, each other. There was a famous protest poster back then that said it all: white man's road through black man's home.
That's powerful.
It really is. And it wasn't just the physical destruction. Living right next to an interstate often meant dealing with more air pollution, more noise. These areas were also more likely to end up with polluting industrial facilities nearby. It limited opportunities and deepened existing inequalities. There's this poignant story of Teresa Polio in East Haven, Connecticut. Her family's home in this tight-knit Italian immigrant neighborhood was first impacted by I-95 construction in the late 40s. Then, decades later in 1998, the entire house was taken and destroyed for yet another expansion. Just erased a family's history, changed the whole neighborhood. That's the very real human cost behind the concrete.
Such a heavy cost. This massive infrastructure project also seeped into our culture, didn't it? Especially the idea of the road trip, how it's shown in movies and books.
Oh, definitely. The road film as a genre really comes into its own in the post-war era, fueled by the rise of car culture and the interstate system. The car becomes this potent symbol of individuality, freedom, maybe even escape. And for that restless youth culture emerging in the 50s and 60s, often feeling trapped in the suburbs, the car and the open road offered a way to rebel, to find yourself. The interstates became the stage for these stories.
And you have to mention Jack Kerouac's On the Road, right? That feels like a starting point for so much of this.
Absolutely seminal. Published in '57, right as the Interstate Act was kicking off, Kerouac's book celebrated the journey itself, quest, movement, transience over just reaching a destination. It glorified the car as this way to transform yourself, and it romanticized the road as this kind of wild space away from the confines of normal life. It captured a feeling, a yearning that really resonated.
But road movies aren't always just celebrations of freedom, are they? There's often a tension there.
There really is a fascinating tension. On one hand, you have this critique of authority, this rebellion. On the other, often a sort of reassertion of traditional values, maybe through the character's ultimate fate. And the genre pulls from older types of films, too. Westerns like The Searchers have that quest element. Gangster films like You Only Live Once, film noir like Detour, they often had characters on the run, foreshadowing that doomed feeling you get in a lot of road movies.
Right, that doomed fate, which really comes through in those iconic late 60s films like Bonnie and Clyde or Easy Rider. How did they use the road?
Those films really leaned into the road trip as social critique. Freedom equals motion. They celebrated this alternative countercultural lifestyle, but, and this is key, they often end incredibly violently. The protagonists are brutally punished. It's almost like society striking back, saying, you can run, but you can't ultimately escape. This rebellion is doomed. A pretty powerful, if bleak, message for the time.
Then things shifted a bit in the 70s.
Yeah, into the 70s, you see more angst and irony. Films like Five Easy Pieces or Badlands, the focus moves inward, more towards existential confusion, psychological breakdown, less overt politics, maybe more nihilism. The road becomes a landscape for internal searching, or maybe just getting lost.
And then we get into the 80s and beyond, the postmodern road film. What defines that?
Yeah, from the mid-80s on, you see the shift, often more self-aware, maybe tongue-in-cheek. Sometimes prioritizing style, visual thrills, special effects over deep meaning or politics. Films like Delusion or David Lynch's Wild at Heart. Rebellion might be treated almost like a joke, or the characters are actually trying to get back to some kind of normalcy, rather than truly escaping. It's often more stylized, more ironic.
Well, there are exceptions, right? Films that push back against that.
Definitely. Selma and Louise in 1991 was huge. It put two women squarely in the driver's seat, challenging the usual male focus of the genre. It managed to blend a mainstream Hollywood story with a really potent feminist critique of society. It totally repoliticized the road trick, even with that incredibly controversial ending them choosing their own fate. It showed the genre could still have sharp teeth. A landmark film.
Absolutely. So all this talk of iconic roads inevitably leads us to the ultimate icon, maybe, Route 66. For so many people around the world, that's the American road trip.
It really is. You hear stories like Jean from France driving at LA to Chicago, soaking in the history. Or Fabian from Germany capturing those amazing sunset photos. The pull of Route 66 is global.
And its history is fascinatingly intertwined with the interstates.
Deeply intertwined. Commissioned back in 1926. But then, starting in 57, the new interstates began bypassing section after section. By 1970, most of it was overshadowed, and it was officially decommissioned entirely in 1985. So think about that. Route 66 has actually been officially gone or in the shadows for more than twice as long as it was in its prime. Yet it still has this incredible energy, this mystique.
It really does.
Yeah.
How did it get that mother road status in the first place?
Well, Cyrus Avery is often called the father of 66 for championing it, but it became the mother road during the absolute desperation of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl in the 30s. John Steinbeck nailed it in The Grapes of Wrath. He called it the mother road, the road of flight. It was geographically positioned perfectly to funnel families escaping the Dust Bowl, heading west towards California, looking for work, for hope. It was literally a lifeline.
Wow. And a whole culture grew up around it, didn't it? Different from the standardized interstate experience.
Completely different. So much unique character. You had all the quirky roadside attractions, the big Texan steak ranch in Amarillo with its crazy 72-ounce steak challenge is a classic example.
Finish it. It's free.
Exactly. You had unique motels, each with its own style. And importantly, during the Jim Crow era, guides like the Green Book were essential for Black travelers. They listed businesses along Route 66 and elsewhere where Black motorists knew they would be welcomed and safe, which sadly wasn't guaranteed everywhere. That's a vital part of the road's complex history.
So the interstates brought efficiency, but maybe lost some of that character, that adventure. What happened to the Route 66 towns when the interstate just bypassed them?
That's exactly the trade-off, efficiency versus character. When the interstate came through, often bypassing the old route by miles, the traffic disappeared. And many of those towns just dried up. Places like Laredo, right on the Texas-New Mexico border, became ghost towns. Bustling businesses shuttered. But today, there's this amazing resurgence happening. People are incredibly passionate about Route 66. They're buying old motels and restoring them, painting murals, creating museums, breathing life back into the historic route. You hear from people like Larry Smith, who bought the Motel Safari in Tucumcari, New Mexico. He said he did it because the road needed the right people to own the businesses along the route. It's this real grassroots love preserving that history.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So why ultimately does Route 66 still hold such power, even after all this time?
I think it's because it taps into something deeper than just asphalt and signs. As one traveler put it beautifully, it's not just a road through towns, it's a road that goes through people's histories and carries legacies of perseverance and hope. You feel it in the personal stories, whether it's someone tackling that giant steak challenge or someone visiting a little yellow house in Williams, Arizona that their great-great-grandfather built right on the route. It connects people to history, to family, to this enduring American spirit of hitting the road and seeking something more. It represents something more profound.
That's a great way to put it. So wrapping this all up, thinking about this deep dive, what does it all mean for you listening now as you maybe drive these roads yourself? We've covered this huge, complex, often contradictory story of the Interstate Highway System, a truly monumental feat that completely reshaped the nation.
Yeah, we've seen how it drove incredible economic growth, gave us unprecedented mobility, but we also have to acknowledge the significant costs, the social costs, the environmental costs, the way it displaced communities, sometimes deepened inequalities. It's really a double-edged sword, that idea of progress.
Absolutely. And whether you're cruising down a six-lane interstate, all planned efficiency, or maybe seeking out a stretch of old Route 66 for that feeling of history, these roads are just fundamentally part of our landscape, our lives, often in ways we don't even consciously think about.
Which maybe leads to a final thought, a question for you to consider next time you're on the road or even just watching a road movie. Beyond just getting from A to B, what other stories, what other impacts, both the ones intended and the ones nobody saw coming, are embedded right there in the concrete and asphalt beneath your wheels? What does the road itself tell us?